Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shanti Pashantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shanti Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shanti Shantireva Shanti Shantirame Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra Sukhinas Santu Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukha Bhag Bhavet Sarvastaratu Durgani Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu Sarvas Sadbuddhimapnotu Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Asato ma satkamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya, aviravirmayeti, rudrayatte dakshinam mukham, te namam pahi nityam. May the divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we do today the sutra number 9, that's on page 62. Tasmin ananyata tat virodhishu udasinata cha. In that devotion, there is cessation of everything other than devotion, that is one-pointedness, and indifference to things opposed to it. The earlier sutra defined what Nirodha means. Nirodha means control, restraint. And it defined by saying control or cessation means discarding public opinion, the injunction of the Vedas, and all activities. And we saw that, first of all, to remember that what Narada is describing here is that state of the highest love. We have seen that bhakti is not one monolithic practice or experience. There is a gradation in it. There is just like love. There is the preliminary stages in love, and as love intensifies, our experiences associated with love also change and grow and mature. So what is being described here is the highest state of bhakti, the highest state of love. And so even though this may not be our present experience, we have to recognize that this is the ideal towards which a bhakta is expected to progress. And so this Nirodha, as described in the earlier sutra, means that discarding public opinion, including the Vedic injunction and all activities, means at that highest state of love, the bhakta does the right thing, or does what is good, does what is right, not because the scriptures say so, not because the people expect the bhakta to do so, but that has become the bhakta's nature at that point. So this is not meant to be a rejection of the scriptures, but acknowledgement of the fact that when that highest state of love is reached, we don't do anything contrary to the scriptures, but we do it because that's become our nature. We are not in that highest state bound by any of these rules, because those rules have done their job. If the purpose of rules, if the purpose of discipline is to eliminate all our weaknesses, if the purpose of discipline is to make us do what is right and what is good, and when we are able to do these things naturally, without any kind of injunction from outside, then the rules have done their function. Then, as I said earlier, we don't have to follow rules, the rules follow us. So that is what was described in the earlier sutra. This sutra that we were studying today gives a further and a clearer meaning of what that Nirodha means. And that Nirodha, that restraint, means there's one-pointedness towards bhakti and indifference to everything opposed to it. And the word ananya, ananya is a Sanskrit term meaning one-pointedness. Anya means other. Ananya, an is a prefix towards anya, and ananya makes it the opposite of the other. Means it is just one. There is no two, no different things. Now, our present experience is that our mind has several different priorities attached to it. Our ways of reasoning are attracted to many different ways of doing it. Our love is shared by many different entities in life. And ananyata means all of this gets focused towards one. That is what is meant by saying in devotion there is cessation of everything other than devotion. So there is one-pointedness. Now, one-pointedness towards what? And that will be later on described in the next sutra, what that one-pointedness involves. But clearly the purpose here is, for a bhakta, the primary purpose is God. Whichever way, again, God is not one fixed entity or one fixed being. The truth is one, the being is one. But that truth, that being, will manifest in different ways in the heart of the devotee. So whichever way God manifests to a devotee, whichever way God speaks to a devotee, whichever way the mind and heart of a devotee responds to God, to that ideal of spirituality, the devotee gives one's one-pointed attention, not distracted by anything else at that highest stage. Now, in order for us to acquire that one-pointedness, there are some important requirements. The first requirement is recognizing the importance of something. For instance, if you are walking on a very narrow path, suppose sometimes it can happen. I remember years earlier when I was undertaken a pilgrimage in the Himalayas and was walking towards the source of the river Ganga. There were stretches on that where the path was extremely narrow. So there was this mountain on one side, and the other side was a deep valley. And it's not a paved road. You had to be very careful, and could be very slippery. Now, if we are on some such occasions, if we find ourselves having to go along a very narrow path, or even drive, sometimes the HOV lane here in some places becomes very narrow, or sometimes some of the lanes are very narrow. So, and if there's a heavy traffic, generally, we automatically, our mind becomes one-pointed, because we know even a little bit of distraction can be disastrous. So just as we become one-pointed naturally on some occasions, when we recognize the necessity of focusing the mind at one place, can we do it towards spiritual life? Can we do it towards God? On those special circumstances when we do it, because we recognize it's important to do it. If I don't do it, I'm going to be hurt. One of the challenges we as spiritual seekers have when we meditate, when we pray, is the mind getting distracted. And we have to ask ourselves, why should my mind get distracted? The mind gets distracted primarily because I have not convinced myself yet that this few minutes that I sit for meditation, thinking of my spiritual ideal and not thinking of anything else, is the most important thing for me at this moment. If I am not convinced myself of that, then the mind will think, oh, I've got to attend to this evening. Tomorrow I've got that thing to do, because the mind has kind of figured it out for itself that planning for tomorrow is somehow more important than sitting now and thinking of God. And if that's what my mind thinks, of course it's going to be distracted. So the primary importance is, can I, as sometimes we say, it's very easy to inspire others. Can we inspire our own selves? So what is important is to say that even for the next few minutes, let's say when we sit for meditation, as we sit, can I make that affirmation in my mind that next 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it is, the time that you sit and pray and meditate, for next 15 minutes, nothing else in life is more important to me than my practice. Nothing is more important. Now, you may not succeed fully right away, but it's important to make that affirmation to oneself. Otherwise, the daily prayer and meditation after some time can become just one more chore to be finished. Oh, I've got this to finish, I've got my meditation to do, just become one of the many things to do. So before we do anything, not just meditation really, ideally speaking, anything, if you've decided to clean your room, or if you have decided you have to begin some project, or if you have to write something, this kind of, it's called Sankalpa. It's making a conscious intention in the mind that this task that I'm engaged in is an important task, and I'm going to give my whole mind to it. This ananyata is not something to be practiced only for a few things. Oh, meditation is important, so I must become ananya, I must become one-pointed for that. Generally, it doesn't help to say some tasks are more important, so I'm going to suddenly switch on my one-pointedness, and the rest of the time I can be as distracted and scattered-minded as I want. That doesn't work, because we don't have a different mind for meditation and a different mind when we are brushing our teeth, or going for a walk, or singing, or taking a shower, or whatever. So the mind is the same, and it's primarily the training of the mind. So even when I'm brushing my teeth, can I do it with one pointedness? While I'm brushing my teeth, if I'm only brushing my teeth and not doing anything else, I might enjoy brushing my teeth more than I do now. When you're doing your dishes, if you do your dishes with a one pointedly, not simultaneously doing 10 other things, you might enjoy doing your dishes. One tricky question is this. Sometimes we tend to believe that multitasking helps us save time. This might be true in some special instances, but in general, there is no evidence to believe that multitasking saves time. Well, it can save time if the different tasks I'm doing, apparently doing simultaneously, can be done in any which way. I don't really have to do them in the best possible way. Then perhaps you could say, well, I can do 2 or 3 things, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and somehow get it over with. But if one is striving for excellence in every little thing that we do, then we will discover that we are not really saving too much time. In fact, whichever task we are engaged in, if we can give our whole mind to it, even if it is a 2-minute task, and then move to the next task and give your whole mind to that, that training of the mind is important, because it is with this trained mind throughout the day, with every little thing I do, I try to do it in a one-pointed way. And then when it's time for meditation and I sit, it'll be much easier. Because a mind that is distracted and scattered 90% of the day, and then suddenly to make it one-pointed for 10% of the time, just not possible. Now again, we may not succeed in it right away. But we have to begin. Because if we don't begin, then there is no chance at all. That's why I like that Chinese proverb. It says, when the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. So no matter how long the journey, we have to take that first step. And when you've taken that one step, you take the next step. Then you take the next step. The steps may be small. They may be slow. But as long as I'm taking them, I'm nearing the destination. On the other hand, if I just stand in one place and start just planning about it, oh, I should do this, I should do that, I don't know when I'm going to do it, I just don't have time to do it. Well, at the end of the day, or after several years, I'll just finding myself standing just where I was. So no matter how imperfectly, no matter how slowly, we just have to keep moving. So that is what one-pointedness means. And indifference to things opposed to it. So there are these 2 things. Then they go side by side. If I have to focus on what is important in my life, then I have also to recognize what is not so important in my life. And no one else should do it for us. We should decide it for ourselves. Among the different interests I have, among the different things I need to do or feel I need to do, which are important, which are less important. And among the things that are important, which are more important, and so on. So even if it's kind of a mental list of priorities, if we have something like that in the mind, deciding what to do, deciding what to choose, when we have several options in the course of a day, or say in the next 6 months, what should I do? Or in the morning, these are 20 different things I need to do today, and I know that I'm not going to be able to do all 20. So which one should get the priority? And sometimes our priority just depends on the mood of the day. But for a spiritual seeker, it's not just about how you feel in the morning that day, but to determine which are things which are most important. And that priority doesn't have to be very rigid. There are times when something may be more important, maybe after a week that may become less important. but we must have some kind of a list. For a spiritual seeker, then it becomes a little bit easier for us then to see, where does my spiritual life fit in the mental list that I have? How high or how low is God or spiritual ideal in my priority list? So these are the things that come into mind. When we speak about ananyata, one-pointedness and indifference to things that are opposed to it. Indifference doesn't mean neglecting things. It just means doing what needs to be done, but not taking too active an interest in it because it really is not that important compared to some other things in your life which may be more important. So again, it's just a list of priorities. Let's see the next verse. It's on page 65. Anyashrayanam tyagaha ananyata. So this sutra will define what that one-pointedness is. This is the general pattern followed in all sutra literature. So every time a word appears, the following sutra will generally define that word. So in Sutra 9, Sutra 8, if you go back, let's say, 6, 7. So 7, Sana Kamayamana Nirodha Rupatvat. Devotion does not require anything else because it is attained through complete control of the senses. So this word Nirodha came in Sutra 7, that is control. Therefore Sutra 8 then defines what Nirodha is, by saying control means discarding public opinion, the injunction of Vedas and all activities. And now that same Nirodha is further defined. So these two sutras, 8 and 9, are explaining what the word Nirodha or control means, the word which first appeared in Sutra 7. And now, in this Sutra 9, the word Ananya, one-pointedness, appeared. And because this word has come, the following sutra, Sutra number 10, defines what that word Ananya means. So, Ananya, he says, discarding the resorting to everything else other than God is one-pointedness. So what is one-pointedness? Discarding all other support. Ashraya. Ashraya is a support. One of the central experience, if you like, of a bhakta is that of God being the only support. And that is what this means. Anya ashrayanam tyagaha. That is discarding everything else, holding on only to God. Holding on, so God becomes the only support. Again, as I said, this is the highest state. Right now, in the lives of all of us, we have many support structures. Clearly, well, our own health is one support thing. That's why health becomes a value in life, because we know that through a healthy body and mind, we are able to take care of ourselves. So a healthy body, a healthy mind is definitely a support. Our family is a support. A good circle of friends, a good neighborhood is a support. Our national identity becomes a support. Being a part of a society, part of a country, becomes a support, because we know that when there is difficulty, when there are challenges, when I face threats in my life of different kinds, all of these supports will come to help me. We know that when there are difficulties, family come together and support the member of the family, or a neighborhood, or the state, and so on. So all these supports we have. There is also financial support. One of the reasons finances or wealth or money becomes a value in life, because we know that if we have financial strength, that can support us. So there are a lot of supports that we have in life. What this sutra points out is that in that state of highest love to God, God becomes the only support. And all other supports are rejected. By rejected is meant not that you don't have to go about actively rejecting it. What it really means is one recognizes the fragility of all other supports. That all other supports are good, important, nice, helpful, can be strengthening, but they are all limited. And we have seen that time and again. For those who thought that, wow, money is itself the value, and if there's a lot of investments, and if there is this economic crisis, and overnight, if you have done some bad investments, the value of money can vanish, or it can increase, but it's very, very not stable. There is a verse in a book called Manusmriti, which says that no matter how much we might have this support around us, the human support around us, in terms of our family, friends, and so on, they say the most that any of these people can accompany us is up to the cremation ground or to the burial ground. None of these people can help us beyond that. The journey beyond death, we have to do alone. All of these supports that we have now will have to be left behind. So if my entire existence is completely dependent on these supports that have to be left behind at some point, what am I going to do? What is going to support me when all these supports are left behind? And that is why this kind of an increasing awareness of the limitedness, the fragility of the supports that we depend on, this becomes more and more apparent as one progresses in spiritual life. And at that point, one recognizes that God is the only bank that never fails, which doesn't need a bailout. In fact, that's the only bank that bails everyone out. That's how a devotee might think, not necessarily in terms of this language, but now dependence on God, according to many bhakti teachers, especially Ramanuja, the great Acharya, dependence on God is not seen as a kind of a bondage. Now, sometimes many of the non-dualists see that as long as there is a difference from the divine, a little bit of, that's not considered the highest state by non-dualists. But there is this other school of thought which sees God as the whole and every one of us as a part of that whole. And that part being dependent on the whole is considered the natural state. So being dependent on God and God alone means being true to our nature. It's not a state of kind of us. Let me put it this way. Being dependent on anything other than God would be a state of bondage. Being dependent on anyone other than God would be depriving us of that freedom. But in the language of bhakti, if we are dependent on God and God alone, and not dependent on any other support, then that we are being one with our true nature. And this has to be practiced when we pray, when we meditate in the path of bhakti. Now, prayer is not, well, prayer can do it. It's primarily meant to do three things. Normally, when we speak about prayer, we usually just think of prayer in terms of asking God for something. But that's just only one kind of prayer, often called petitionary prayer, making a petition towards God, asking God for, it could be asking for some material benefits, or it could be even asking God for some spiritual qualities. God, give me strength, make me unselfish. But you're still petitioning God for something. So that's one kind of prayer, but that's not all what prayer is. The other main function of prayer is to open our heart to receive God's grace, to receive divine power. So prayer is a very active practice. It's not just passively just sitting there and saying, "Oh Lord, give me this, give me that." No, it's more than that. It's focusing our mind completely at the spiritual ideal, to God, and opening our heart to receive God's grace. Now, we can receive God's grace in our heart only as much as there is space in our heart. And if my heart is already filled with too many other things, there won't be space for God's power, God's grace to go. So there has to be emptying from my heart of everything that is not important, that is not relevant. Emptying my heart from all the junk that has accumulated there over the years, maybe over several lives maybe. That is where that, as we saw earlier, that prioritizing becomes important. That is where, for a bhakta to recognize what is important, what is not important, becomes very necessary. One incident that I can never forget, and I've mentioned to you often, is about a person who used to come many years ago in our Bombay monastery. I had just joined the monastery then. I was a young novice, and one of my earliest duties was to take care of their bookshop in the monastery. And so there was this person who used to come, and every week buy many books, which was great for me because more sales of books. But once, after a few weeks, I asked this person, because it just seemed too much. How much can a person read every week? And so I asked him once, "Do you really read all these books that you take?" And he was a very nice person. So he just smiled and said, years ago, when I first started buying books, it was with the idea of reading them. But now, over the years, I find that I'm just taking them, they're all stacked up well in my shelves at home. But now I realize that, no, I don't think I'm ever going to read all of them. So in this life, I'll just buy the books. In the next life, I can read them. He said it jokingly, of course, but I think I've often thought about that incident. And it's not just about books. It's about things that we accumulate in life. And it feels good to have many things around us. But at some point, we may want to just simplify our lives. And simplifying our lives would mean, among the things that I'm surrounded myself with, which are things that I really need? Now, it makes sense I'm not saying just empty out your home with everything. That's not what I'm suggesting. There are clearly things that are needed. There are things that you may not need now, but you may need after 6 months. Clearly, here, especially living in New England, we know that there are at least 2 sets of clothes we need, one for summer and one for winter. The winter clothes would be unusable in summer, and summer clothes unusable in winter. And then if you want a little bit, some fall clothing or some spring clothing. So I can recognize things that are not needed on a daily basis, but which will be needed in a course of a year at least. So that's understandable. But what if I have something in my home and I know it's there, but I have not even looked at it for the last 10 years or last 5 years. It's just lying in my garage or in my basement. What should I do with it? Now, it's not easy. It's not easy to just take these things which I haven't touched for the last 5 or 10 years to just take and dump them and throw them. But at some point, it's going to be done. And if I don't, sometimes I have seen when in many families, both in India as well as after coming here, that when there is a death in the family, someone passes away, and then the children or others, well, what do you do with all the things used by this person? And if other members of the family are not interested in the books you have accumulated or all the stuff that you have, it's just going to go away, the Salvation Army or someplace else, which is good. It will be used by someone else. But it's something that we can think about. Again, there are no rigid rules about it. But simplifying our life is very important. And if it is so difficult to get rid of these things which are not important, what is even more difficult is to get rid of the useless ideas and information I've accumulated in my head. That's even more tough. Yeah, sometimes my experience has been, and probably some of you might feel that that's something like that, maybe your experience too. When someone sends a link, said, oh, there is something you can read, or sometimes you are doing some research and you find, oh, this is something I can read. And then you open that browser window and you keep it with the idea, well, I'm going to read it later. And then you suddenly find 50 tabs in your browser and you never get time to read them. And then eventually someday you just get tired and then close all of them. Again, simplifying our life at every level is very important and as I said, it's not just about external life. More complications that are in simplifying internal life is important too. And therefore it's the training of the mind. So although I'm speaking about external and internal, the mind that does it is the same. And if my mind is able to make that discernment about what is important and not important in the external objects that I'm dealing with, it'll be easier for the mind then to deal with the internal objects, which are my old thoughts, emotions, and feelings, and simplify it. So that's the second function of prayer, is to open our heart and make some space in it for God's grace and power to enter into it. And a third function of the heart is really then to discover our relationship with God, discover how we are connected with God, to recognize the role of grace in life. You might remember Ramakrishna said that God's grace is like the breeze, and it's always blowing. So grace is always available, but we need to unfurl our sails in order to catch that wind Um, to some extent, all these other things that we do in a preliminary stage of our spiritual life, studying the scriptures, trying to abide by the do's and don'ts of the scripture, by following the examples of the great ones, doing our daily prayer, meditation, all these different rules that we make for ourselves, the different spiritual practices that we do, is like unfurling the sails. And when all these things are done perfectly, then we are able to catch that breeze of God's grace that is already blowing. And so both of these have a role to play. But at that highest stage of love, the devotee sees that God alone is my support. And all other supports are too fragile to depend on. So if you want to put your eggs in only one basket, that basket better be God's basket, because all other baskets are not undependable. That's the idea. So I'll stop here. If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions.
Swamiji, in the Bible, there's this verse that says, "Give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, and give unto God's what is God's." Mm-hmm. And God, in the context of that statement, everything belongs to God. Mm-hmm. So give everything to God. So my question is, in the context of supports, you mentioned relying on God versus relying on money or friendship or people. If everything is God, couldn't God's support to us come in the form of relationships and money and social structures? And so in that sense, how does one distinguish in the context of non-duality?
How God's support comes to us is very difficult to define objectively, I think. And sometimes how God's support comes to us, how God shows love to us, the way that has been defined has shaped even cultures and societies. For instance, in some Protestant societies, in Calvinism, I think, one of the connections they made was God shows his support, or God shows love through prosperity. So if I'm prosperous, if I'm wealthy, that is how God shows that God loves me. So God's love for me gets expressed through making me wealthy or prosperous. Now that kind of a teaching has been shown by some social psychologists to say that teaching, when it was internalized, people worked hard. People worked to become prosperous and wealthy, because then they could feel within, yes, God loves me. And in contrast, some thinkers have pointed out that, for instance, in Eastern Europe, many of the Catholic countries in which God's suffering for humanity was more stressed, and that teaching got internalized. So suffering for Jesus became a dominant motive, and at the social level, many of those societies remained somewhat poorer, backward than these others. Now, I mean, one can debate all this, but this is at least one way of thinking. So how we think, how God's support comes to us, the way we think will shape what we do in life and how we do in life. So my feeling, my personal feeling in this is that if anything can make me go closer to my true nature. If anything can make me transcend my own limitations. If that, whatever happens in my life that will help me do this, I see that as an act of grace. And let me give you an example. There is a story in I don't know which source it is in, but the story about Krishna and Arjuna. So normally in India, sometimes they say that if you don't know the source, you can safely say it is from the Mahabharata, because it is like 100,000 verses. Nobody is ever going to read them fully, and you are likely to find it is somewhere there, some reference to it. But story is like this. So Krishna and Arjuna apparently, they disguise themselves, and Krishna says, you come with me. And the idea is there is a great, very wealthy devotee of Krishna who has invited him home. And so Krishna goes there dressed as disguised as a holy person, and then Arjuna accompanies him as his attendant. And so these that wealthy people who want to honor this saintly person, who don't know he's Krishna, but they know he's a very saintly person. And so they invite him, they honor him, they feed him with gold plates and all the finery, great. And then at the time of going, Krishna blesses them and they salute. Krishna says, may you become more prosperous, may more wealth come to you. And they are happy, they get the blessing of a holy person. And then next, Krishna goes to another one devotee who is very poor, who has only one cow for support. But this devotee welcomes this holy person and says, I don't have anything else to give. All that I have is a little bit of milk from this cow. And so gives that milk with great devotion and prostrates before. And then Krishna brings that milk, blesses that devotee, and then while coming out, he just tells Arjuna, may this cow die. And Arjuna is horrified. It's like, wait a minute. The only support that this devotee has is this cow. And that person who had all this wealth, you said, may you become more wealthy. And this devotee has only cow, you said there's only one support is taken away. Now this, from a superficial standpoint, this story makes no sense at all. But then Krishna explains. He said, that devotee who invited me and all this pomp and glory, there is a lot of ego there. This devotee is going to take a long time before he reaches God. He needs some more experiences, more blows in life before he gets it. So therefore, by giving him even more wealth, I am making sure that time will come when he'll face a crisis, and then eventually he'll come to me. So it's going to take a long time, so more money. Now he said, this other devotee to whom he went, he said, she is very near to God. The only thing that is holding her back is, other than God's support, is this one little cow she's so attached to. Because that's the only other support, the support other than God, that's kind of holding her back. So I just kind of broke that attachment she had with just taking that cow out of her life. Now, here, giving of more wealth doesn't seem to be an act of grace. I mean, eventually, yes, ultimately it would help, but at the moment, it's going to keep this person even more bound. On the other hand, this kind of pushing that poor woman into a greater crisis is really an act of grace. That's where God shows his or her support more through an act which superficially looks very cruel. And therefore, objectively to determine which is God's grace and which is not is difficult. But we can know, sometimes not immediately, but sometimes in retrospect, the devotee finds that everything that has happened in his or her life is really an act of grace. Sometimes when we are passing through a very difficult period in life, it's no fun. And if we don't have that innate faith, we might even curse. I mean, people stop going to church. People stop praying, said, what's the use of praying? I've prayed so much, and this is what happened to me. But a devotee is not that the devotee enjoys going through crisis. It can be tough. But one then never loses that innate faith in God. That's what Shraddha means. Yes, it's a difficult time. One might weep and cry. All of that will be possible. But innately, and if we don't realize it then, sometime, perhaps after the crisis is over, then one looks back and says, yes, that thing happened, which happened in my life, terrible as it was, extremely painful as it was, that was necessary for me to happen, for me to be where I am now. So if we find ourselves in a good place now, whatever we are now is a resultant of everything that has happened in our past, both good and bad. And so everything that happened in our past was necessary to bring me where I am today. Normally what we think is, oh, if only that thing had not happened in my life. As if that particular thing had not happened in my life, I will still be where I am today in a much better way. Probably not. Probably not. So sometimes if we change just one little event that happened in our past, and many of us would want to change things that happened in the past, we don't know if that one thing was taken out, what would be the resultant today? We don't know. We don't know whether it would be better or worse. We don't know. That's why sometimes they say, I don't know what that scientific term is. They say that even if you change the position of one atom here in this entire material universe, some kind of a dynamic equilibrium is being disturbed. So something is changing somewhere else. That's why in the Buddhist teaching, the Buddha said in one place, this is like this because that is like that. If you change that, then this gets changed. Everything is interrelated. In fact, that's one of the central teachings in Buddhist philosophy. I think it's some called like codependent origination or something, that everything is dependent on everything else. You change one thing and other things also get changed. That's the idea.
Swamiji, depending only on God, I think often people say that it is more of a weakness than strength. Is that correct?
No, I think it's very, very strong strength. You need a lot of strength to depend only on God and nothing else. Because if you didn't need, I mean, think about it this way. Everything happens through God's will. And if I depend totally on God and nothing else, everything is taken care of. I don't have to worry at all. But how many people are able to do it? If it were so easy and so not requiring any strength, we all should be able to do it. So I think affirming our dependence on God and rejecting, or at least recognizing, not just intellectually, but recognizing that the greatest and the highest support is only God, you need a lot of strength for it. It's not easy. Yeah. Yeah. Philip.
Maharaj, I just have a small linguistic question about Nirodha. Nirodha.
Yeah.
So Bhuteshananda Ji translates it as control, and I've noticed that you also use this word. It seems a bit maybe misleading to me because it comes from rud, which means suppressing. blocking something.
Mhm.
When you control something, you may control an emotion in the sense that you allow yourself to have it, but you control the kind of extreme manifestations of it. Whereas Nirodha, it seems to mean simply suppressing it. You know, the Yoga Sutras start with this definition of yoga as chitti vritti nirodha. It's suppressing the sort of the fluctuations of the mind, the scattered energies, as you
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So would you agree that it's better to say suppression?
Well, suppression, I mean, suppression, I get your point. I think it's probably putting it, I think it's more a kind of a linguist thing, because suppression and control means that it's coming up and I'm trying to control it from coming up. So it's essentially, I'm suppressing it. But suppressing it probably, I agree with you, suppressing it is probably nearer to the sense that Nirodha implies than control. But I think it's a very fine distinction. Yeah. It doesn't change the basic thrust of the sutra. Thank you.
Swamiji, you mentioned how we should clean our hearts so there's more space for God. So are there some ways to do an inventory of what's in our head and heart so we can begin to do some spring cleaning?
Inventory of what is in our home also is important. Yeah. I mean, inventories can be helpful. But I mean, just having an inventory and then doing nothing about it is just waste of time. So I think it's great to have, I mean, there are lots of apps now also if you want to make a more systematic inventory. And actually making an inventory like that gives us a more, I think it makes it more tangible, just to see the extent of things that we have, and then we can kind of clearly see. It's a little bit easier to do with material things. But yeah, sure. So we recognize in course, as we grow older especially, we recognize that having too many ideas is not necessarily a sign of intelligence. Whatever ideas we have in the head, and ideas come to us from different sources, from the books that we read, from conversations, and so on. The ability to see how those ideas are connected and interconnected, where they fit into the larger picture, and the ability to discard ideas that don't fit in and are not needed, that is very important. In fact, sometimes too many ideas, the Swami Vivekananda used to call it the mind becoming a kind of hodgepodge of ideas, is a problem. And it's helpful, especially when we start taking spiritual life seriously. To decide what kind of ideas I want to enter into my head. Because once an idea enters into the head, it's not easy to discard it. It's there, and it will keep on disturbing if it is of no use to us. Now the ideas that are already there, there's nothing much you can do immediately. Now it's already there, but at least going forward, we can exercise some control about what kind of stuff I want to throw inside my head. I mean, lots of time when we have become health conscious, we become a little bit more careful about the kind of food that we eat. We know if we eat a lot of junk food, it's going to create trouble. The same thing can happen with ideas too. If a lot of junk ideas go into the head, it's going to cause trouble. And so a little bit of care about that will be important, I think. Yeah. Divesh?
Swamiji, in the process of clearing things out, I think we also need to be careful that if I do an inventory of the objects I've got and I identify one object I need to throw away, But then if I spend the rest of my life regretting about the fact that I had to throw it away, I didn't help the process in the first place.
Well, I mean, actually, you have not thrown it away from your mind.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
sure, yeah. So that's why I said there is an external object and your internal need and desire for it, and both need to be thrown away. And the external one throwing is easier than the internal one.
Swamiji, you mentioned about the mind controlling. So how one mind is controlling other mind, because which mind is going outwards? So two kind of minds we have, or many kinds?
Yeah, well, yes, yeah, exactly. That's why sometimes we read in books about higher mind and lower mind. That's why when the Gita says, lift yourself, or the Upanishad says, lift yourself by yourself, or when the Gita says your mind can be your friend, the mind can be your enemy, all of these different references we find in the Gita and the Upanishads shows that our own mind has kind of become divided. Something we spoke about in earlier class about alienation, about the conscious and the unconscious. So there is a part of our mind which, well, let me put it this way. So when we say we are spiritual seekers, there is a part of our mind which recognizes fully the spiritual ideal, which wants to do everything correct. But it's only a part of the mind, it's not the whole mind. And there is the other part of the mind which has other priorities, other things that need to be we need to attend to. And so when we experience sometime a dilemma or not able to decide what to do, it's really my one mind says, do this, the other mind says, don't do it. And so that's why there's tension, and we feel stressed out, we feel anxious, because it's my own mind fighting with itself, a part of my mind fighting with the other mind. And therefore, one of the goals of spiritual life really is trying to make these two parts friends, making them realize it's a little bit like this. Suppose my two hands, they started fighting with each other. And they thought like they are two different beings. And he's like, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. And then suddenly they realize, no, we are connected to the same being. We can't just fight. So, and then they realize, well, my health depends on your health, and your health depends on my health. And then they'll become friends. So the mind also has to do like that. And when the mind becomes undivided, actually a whole life has to be undivided. At present, our life is divided at very levels. There is the distinction between secular and spiritual, between this and between that, between recreation and work life, between friends. So there are lots of compartments. And eventually all these compartments have to go. And this can happen more easily if God becomes the focus of our life. Yeah.
So it's just a practical observation about, getting rid of the things. And I recently read this book by Japanese author. It's called Goodbye Things. So he gives a lot of suggestions. But one of the things that I found useful is when he talked about those little, clutter things like cards or notes, memorable things that we'll never use, but we have it. Just take pictures of it and store it in your computer. And then when you feel sorry or bad for throwing them away, just have a look at the picture. It's always going to be there. So I found it really useful, even though I haven't used it yet, but that's something to keep in mind.
All right. Okay, so we'll continue when we meet next time. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. On Sunday satsang, the topic will be how to be happy. Next Wednesday, we will continue with the study of Bhakti Sutra, And on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. Let's conclude with a prayer. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you. There's one other announcement I forgot to mention, and that is tomorrow evening at 6 to 7:30. If you are free, at Harvard Divinity School, at the Center for the Study of World Religions, I'm going to lead an informal discussion preceded by a brief talk I'm going to give on how Hindu monasticism engages with the issues that we are confronting in the modern world. So it's about, they are having a series on monasticism from different traditions and how it engages with contemporary issues. So if you are free, so this is at Center for the Study of World Religions, 45 Francis Avenue, just in front of Andover Hall in Divinity School. So that's what tomorrow.